The stars had never seemed so close until Captain Jake Morrison looked out from the bridge of the exploration ship New Frontier. 3 years of faster-than-light travel had brought humanity this far from Earth, and every day brought new wonders. The crew worked quietly around him, checking instruments and monitoring the long-range sensors that swept the darkness ahead. They were explorers, the first humans to venture this deep into unknown space, and Jake felt the weight of that responsibility every moment. The alert came without warning. Lisa Martinez, the ship's science officer, called out from her station, with excitement in her voice. An unknown vessel had appeared on their sensors, moving toward them with purpose. Jake ordered the crew to stations and prepared for humanity's first contact with alien intelligence. The ship that approached them was unlike anything they had imagined, sleek and crystalline, pulsing with soft blue light that seemed to flow through its hull like liquid energy. When the aliens made contact, they called themselves Zentari. Their leader spoke perfect English, which surprised Jake until the being explained that they had been monitoring Earth's communications for decades. The Zentari appeared as tall, graceful creatures with large eyes and pale skin that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. They moved with fluid precision and spoke in measured tones that suggested great intelligence and careful thought. The first meeting went smoothly. The Zentari shared basic information about their civilization and the galaxy beyond. They spoke of a great council that governed most of known space, maintaining peace between hundreds of different species. They described trade routes that spanned thousands of light years and technologies that could terraform dead worlds into gardens. To Jake and his crew, it sounded like paradise, a galactic community ready to welcome humanity with open arms. But while Jake and his crew celebrated this historic contact, something else was happening in the depths of space. Far from human knowledge, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session. 12 different species gathered in a vast chamber that floated in the void between stars, each representative bringing news of this new discovery. They had been watching humanity for years, studying their broadcasts and analyzing their behavior patterns. The report came from X9, a being whose species specialized in understanding the minds of other races. X9 had spent months reviewing human history, studying their wars and conflicts, their literature and entertainment, their responses to crisis and defeat. What X9 found disturbed the Council greatly. Humans, it seemed, had a dangerous flaw in their thinking. They did not know when to quit. Every species the Council had encountered eventually learned to accept their place in the galaxy. When faced with superior force or impossible odds, intelligent beings would surrender, negotiate, or find ways to live within the limits imposed upon them. This was natural, logical, and necessary for galactic peace. But humans showed no such wisdom. Throughout their history, they had faced extinction, defeat, and overwhelming odds, yet they continued fighting, adapting, and refusing to accept their fate. The council members debated long into the night. The Krell, a warlike species that had learned to channel their aggression into service, argued that humans could be useful soldiers if properly controlled. The Vorthak, beings of pure thought who communicated through mental energy, worried that human emotions were too chaotic and unpredictable. The Zentari, with their love of logic and order, found human behavior simply incomprehensible. After days of discussion, the Council reached a decision. Humanity could not be allowed to develop unchecked. Their refusal to accept defeat made them dangerous to the careful balance the Council had maintained for thousands of years. Yet they showed promise, intelligence, and capabilities that could benefit galactic civilization if properly directed. The Council would implement the suppression protocol, a carefully designed series of setbacks and failures that would teach humanity their proper place in the galactic order. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Human ships would experience mysterious equipment failures at crucial moments. Trade negotiations would fall through due to minor misunderstandings. Scientific expeditions would discover that promising worlds had already been claimed by other species. Colonial efforts would face unexpected obstacles and bureaucratic delays. Each failure would be explainable, Each setback would seem like natural bad luck or human error. The Council had used this method successfully for over 2,000 years. Every species eventually broke under the pressure, accepting that they were not meant to lead but to follow, not to expand freely but to grow within the boundaries set by their betters. The psychological pressure was subtle but irresistible, wearing down the strongest will until surrender seemed like the only rational choice. Dr. Lisa Martinez had returned to Earth with the new frontier, her mind full of excitement about the galaxy they had discovered. She threw herself into analyzing the data they had collected, studying alien technology and preparing for the trade missions and diplomatic contacts that would surely follow. But as months passed, she began to notice troubling patterns in the reports coming from other human missions. The colony ship Horizon had suffered a complete engine failure just before reaching its destination. The trading vessel Opportunity had been forced to abandon negotiations when their computers mysteriously lost all the cultural data they needed. The research station Discovery had been evacuated when life support systems failed for no apparent reason. Each incident was different, but Lisa saw connections that others missed. She began keeping records, tracking every failure and analyzing the statistical probability of so many unrelated problems happening to human operations. The numbers told a story that made her increasingly uncomfortable. Either humanity had suddenly become incredibly unlucky, or someone was working very hard to make them fail. When she brought her concerns to Earth Command, the officials politely dismissed her theories as paranoid speculation, but Lisa Martinez was a scientist, and scientists did not give up easily when the evidence contradicted the accepted explanation. She continued her investigation, building a case that would soon shake humanity's faith in their new galactic neighbors and set in motion events that would change the galaxy forever. The Council's plan was already beginning, but they had made one crucial error in their calculations. They assumed that human nature was a flaw that could be corrected through pressure and patience, never realizing that what they saw as a dangerous defect was actually humanity's greatest strength. The failures began small and seemed random at first. Commander Ryan Blake stood on the bridge of the colony ship Horizon, watching his engineers work frantically to restore power to the fusion drives. 15,000 colonists slept in cryopods below, trusting him to deliver them safely to their new home in the Kepler system. They had been so close, just days away from orbital insertion, when every primary system decided to fail at once. Blake had been a military engineer before taking command of the Horizon, and he knew machines better than most people knew their own families. The pattern of failures made no sense according to everything he understood about redundant systems and safety protocols. Primary fusion containment had failed first, followed by backup power, then emergency systems, all within minutes of each other. The probability of such a cascade failure was so low that his computers refused to calculate it. The rescue came too quickly. Within 6 hours of their distress signal, a Zentari fleet appeared out of hyperspace with relief supplies and temporary housing modules. Blake felt grateful at first, but as he watched the efficient alien response, questions began forming in his mind. The Zentari had appeared with exactly the right equipment to handle their specific emergency, as if they had been prepared for this exact situation. When he asked how they had responded so fast, the Zentari explained that they maintained emergency fleets throughout the sector, ready to help any species in need. The temporary accommodation was a space station in a system designated only by numbers. The Zentari called it a processing facility where refugees could stay until permanent arrangements were made. Blake and his colonists found themselves assigned to cramped quarters with basic life support and minimal facilities. The Zentari assured them this was temporary, just until suitable worlds could be found for human settlement. But weeks turned into months with no sign of progress. Back on Earth, Dr. Lisa Martinez continued collecting data on the growing list of human failures across known space. The trading mission to the Vorthak homeworld had ended when their cultural database corrupted itself just before crucial negotiations. A scientific expedition to study ancient ruins had been forced to abandon their work when all their equipment began malfunctioning simultaneously. Military patrols reported navigation failures that left them lost in empty space until alien ships arrived to guide them home. Admiral Kate Sullivan had commanded Earth's space defense forces for 20 years, and she had developed an instinct for patterns that others missed. When Lisa Martinez approached her with statistical evidence of coordinated sabotage, Sullivan found herself looking at data that confirmed her own growing suspicions. Too many things were going wrong with human operations, and too many alien ships were conveniently nearby when disasters struck. Sullivan arranged a private meeting with President Jonathan Hayes, bringing Lisa's research and her own analysis of the military implications. They met in a secure facility deep beneath Earth's capital, where surveillance was impossible and conversations could not be monitored. Hayes listened to their presentation with growing alarm as the evidence mounted that humanity was being systematically undermined by their supposed galactic allies. The president authorized a classified investigation into the pattern of failures. But he also made a decision that would prove crucial in the months ahead. If humanity was being tested or manipulated, he wanted to ensure they would pass whatever challenge they were facing. He quietly activated research programs that had been dormant since the first contact, projects designed to develop purely human technologies independent of alien assistance. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, the Galactic Council monitored human reactions to their carefully orchestrated setbacks. The Zentari reported that human leaders were showing signs of stress and uncertainty, exactly as predicted by their psychological models. The Vorthak noted increased emotional turbulence in human mental broadcasts, suggesting that the pressure was beginning to affect their collective psyche. The Krell observed that human military readiness was actually increasing rather than decreasing, but they attributed this to natural defensive responses that would fade once humans accepted their situation. But Commander Blake refused to accept his situation. Instead of waiting passively for the Zentari to find his people a new home, he organized the colonists into work teams that began improving their temporary quarters. Engineers like Danny Price, who had been part of the original colony mission, started rebuilding failed systems using salvaged materials and innovative techniques. Within months, the cramped refugee station had been transformed into a functional manufacturing facility. The colonists discovered that working together on practical problems helped them cope with their displacement and uncertainty. They built new life support systems that were more efficient than the original Zentari equipment. They developed hydroponic farms that produced fresh food in spaces that had been considered unusable. They even began manufacturing tools and components that other refugee populations requested in trade. Blake watched his people adapt and overcome their circumstances with fierce pride. These were not broken refugees waiting for rescue. They were pioneers doing what humans had always done when faced with impossible situations. They were solving problems, building solutions, and refusing to let circumstances define their future. When Zentari officials suggested that the colonists might want to consider permanent settlement in less desirable systems, Blake politely declined and continued his preparations for eventual departure. The council began receiving reports that concerned them greatly. Human responses to the suppression protocol were not following established patterns. Previous species had become more compliant and cooperative under pressure, seeking accommodation within the existing galactic order. But humans seemed to be becoming more independent and self-reliant, developing capabilities that reduced their dependence on alien assistance. Dr. Martinez published her findings in a restricted report that circulated among Earth's scientific and military leadership. Her analysis showed that the probability of natural equipment failures occurring in the observed pattern was less than 1 in several billion. Either humanity was experiencing the worst streak of bad luck in galactic history, or someone was deliberately sabotaging human operations. The report concluded with a recommendation that Earth begin developing contingency plans for operating without alien support. Admiral Sullivan used Martinez's research to justify a massive expansion of human military capabilities. If their new galactic neighbors were not as friendly as they appeared, humanity needed to be prepared for the possibility that cooperation might not be an option. She quietly began construction of ships designed with purely human technology. Systems that aliens could not easily understand or sabotage. The Galactic Council watched these developments with growing alarm. Their models predicted that humans should be seeking ways to appease their galactic superiors by this point, not building independent capabilities. The Zentari proposed escalating to the next phase of the protocol, but the Vorthik warned that human emotional energy was becoming more focused and determined rather than scattered and defeated. In his cramped quarters, aboard the refugee station, Commander Blake looked out at the stars and made a promise to his sleeping colonists. They had come to the galaxy seeking new homes and new opportunities, and they would not be denied by equipment failures, bureaucratic delays, or temporary setbacks. Humans had crossed oceans in wooden ships, survived ice ages with primitive tools, and reached for the stars with chemical rockets. A few mysterious equipment failures would not stop them now. The Council's plan was proceeding exactly as designed, but the results were not what they had expected. Instead of breaking human spirit, the systematic failures were forging it into something stronger. Instead of teaching humans their place in the galactic order, the setbacks were teaching them that they could succeed without alien help, the suppression. That was meant to humble humanity was preparing them for something the galaxy had never seen before. 3 years had passed since first contact, and the galaxy had become a different place for humanity. Dr. Lisa Martinez stood before the emergency assembly of Earth's government, presenting evidence that would change everything humans thought they knew about their place among the stars. Her data showed beyond doubt that the pattern of failures plaguing human operations was not random bad luck, but deliberate sabotage orchestrated by their supposed alien allies. The assembly hall fell silent as Martinez displayed her analysis. Every major human initiative had faced obstacles that followed the same pattern. Equipment failures occurred at precisely the moments when they would cause maximum disruption. Trade negotiations collapsed due to cultural misunderstandings that seemed almost scripted. Colony ships experienced problems just before reaching their destinations. The statistical probability of such coordinated failures happening naturally was essentially zero. President Hayes rose from his seat, his face grim but determined. He had suspected this day would come ever since Admiral Sullivan first brought him Martinez's preliminary findings. Now, faced with undeniable proof that humanity was being systematically undermined, he made the decision that would define his presidency and humanity's future. Earth would no longer depend on alien goodwill or alien technology. They would forge their own path among the stars. The Human Independence Initiative launched within days of the assembly meeting. Admiral Sullivan took command of the program with a mandate to develop purely human capabilities that could operate without alien assistance or approval. Research facilities across Earth and its colonies received massive funding increases. Scientists and engineers who had been studying alien technology were redirected to creating human alternatives. Military production shifted to designs that aliens had never seen and could not easily counter. Danny Price found himself at the center of this technological revolution. The engineer who had helped transform Commander Blake's refugee station into a manufacturing hub was now leading Earth's most ambitious engineering project. His team worked in underground facilities, developing new forms of faster-than-light travel that operated on principles completely different from alien drives. They called it quantum tunneling, and it promised to make human ships independent of the hyperspace lanes that aliens controlled. Meanwhile, Blake's colonists had become symbols of human determination throughout known space. Their refugee station had grown into a thriving community that other displaced humans looked to for inspiration. Blake received messages from human settlements across the galaxy, all asking for advice on how to overcome the obstacles they faced. He shared everything his people had learned about building self-sufficient communities with limited resources. The transformation of human society happened with startling speed. Communities that had relied on alien trade began developing local industries. Scientists who had studied alien knowledge started creating human alternatives. Military units that had trained with alien equipment switched to weapons and systems built entirely by human hands. The sense of shared purpose that emerged from recognizing their situation unified humanity in ways that peaceful prosperity never had. The Galactic Council watched these developments with growing concern. The Centauri reported that human technological development was accelerating rather than stagnating under pressure. The Vorthek noted that human mental broadcasts had become more coordinated and focused, suggesting unprecedented levels of cooperation. The Krell observed that human military preparations were advancing rapidly and appeared to be based on doctrines designed specifically to counter alien advantages. Council member Vex 9 presented an emergency analysis of human behavior that challenged everything they thought they knew about intelligent species. Humans were not responding to pressure by seeking accommodation within the existing order. Instead, they were using that pressure as motivation to become completely independent of galactic civilization. Their refusal to accept defeat had evolved into a refusal to accept dependence on anyone who might try to control them. The Council faced a decision that none of their previous protocols had prepared them for. The suppression protocol was designed to humble new species and teach them their proper place in the galactic hierarchy. But humanity was using that protocol as a training program, learning to overcome every obstacle the galaxy could present. They were becoming stronger, more united, and more dangerous with each setback. Colonel Patricia Lewis commanded the exploration vessel Pioneer when it encountered the first test of humanity's new resolve. Her ship was equipped with experimental human technology and crewed by volunteers who knew they might not return from their mission. Their orders were simple: explore beyond the boundaries that aliens had set for human expansion and gather intelligence about galactic military capabilities. The encounter came near the Vega system, where Lewis found herself facing a Krell battle fleet of 50 warships. The Krell commander, a warrior named Vraktorn who had never met defeat in 300 battles, demanded that the tiny human ship return to restricted space immediately. Standard protocol called for the humans to comply or face destruction. But Lewis had different plans. Instead of retreating, Lewis requested permission to conduct scientific observations of the Krell fleet. When Vraktorn denied this request, Lewis calmly informed him that she would be conducting her scans anyway, as the Krell had no legal authority over human scientific activities in neutral space. The Krell commander found himself in a situation that his training had never covered. No inferior species had ever simply ignored his demands and continued their activities as if his presence was irrelevant. Lewis spent the next 6 hours methodically scanning every ship in the Krell fleet while broadcasting her findings back to Earth. She analyzed their weapons, propulsion systems, defensive capabilities, and tactical formations with scientific thoroughness. When Vraktorn fired warning shots across her bow, she thanked him for the additional data about Krell weapon signatures and continued her work. The situation escalated when other Krell commanders demanded that Vraktorn simply destroy the impudent human vessel. But Lewis had positioned her ship carefully, and destroying it would require firing through the formation of several Krell vessels. More importantly, her complete lack of fear or deference in the face of overwhelming force created a psychological crisis for warriors who had built their entire identity around intimidating others into submission. The encounter ended when Lewis calmly announced that she had completed her mission and would be returning to Earth with valuable intelligence about Krell military capabilities. She thanked Vraktorn for his cooperation and departed through a quantum tunnel that opened directly beneath her ship. The Krell fleet was left staring at empty space, trying to understand what had just happened. Vraktorn's report to the Council described the encounter as unlike anything in his extensive combat experience. The humans had shown no fear, no respect for superior force, and no recognition that they were supposed to be intimidated by Krell military might. Instead, they had treated his fleet as a research opportunity and had departed when their scientific curiosity was satisfied. The Council convened emergency sessions. As reports of similar encounters poured in from across the galaxy, human ships were appearing in systems that should have been beyond their reach, conducting scientific observations that ignored alien territorial claims. Human colonies were expanding into regions that had been declared off-limits by galactic authorities. Human traders were establishing commerce routes that bypassed council-controlled markets entirely. Dr. Martinez made a discovery that would prove crucial in the confrontations ahead. Her analysis of alien behavioral patterns revealed that council species were following rigid protocols that assumed rational surrender when faced with overwhelming force. Their entire system of galactic management was built on the premise that inferior species would eventually accept their designated role when properly motivated. But humanity's refusal to acknowledge defeat as a permanent condition had created a logical paradox in their system the aliens literally could not comprehend. A species that treated impossible odds as merely difficult problems requiring creative solutions? Their protocols had no provisions for dealing with subjects who responded to pressure by becoming more independent rather than more compliant. They were like chess masters trying to play against opponents who insisted on moving their pieces in ways that violated the rules of the game. President Hayes prepared to address not just humanity, but the entire galaxy with a message that would define Earth's position for generations to come. The speech was broadcast on frequencies that every major species monitored, ensuring that the Council would receive humanity's response to their systematic campaign of suppression. Hayes stood before cameras that would carry his words to billions of beings across hundreds of worlds and spoke with quiet confidence about what it meant to be human. The galaxy was about to learn that trying to make humanity quit was like trying to teach water not to be wet. Some things were simply fundamental to the nature of what they were, and humanity's refusal to accept defeat was written into the very core of their species. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the vast chamber that floated in the darkness between stars, but this time the atmosphere was different. For 2,000 years, the Council had managed galactic affairs with calm confidence, secure in their proven methods of integrating new species into the established order. Now, for the first time in their collective memory, those methods had not just failed but had created a situation none of them knew how to handle. Thex-9 stood before the assembled representatives, holding a data crystal that contained 3 years of analysis on human behavior patterns. The Zenop psychologist, who had confidently predicted humanity's eventual submission, now faced the task of explaining how spectacularly wrong those predictions had been. Every model, every psychological framework, every historical precedent suggested that the suppression protocol should have worked. Instead, it had created something unprecedented in galactic history. The Zentari delegate, speaking with the measured logic that characterized their species, presented the most troubling statistics. Human technological development had accelerated by 300% since the suppression began. Their industrial capacity had grown exponentially as they shifted from alien-dependent systems to purely human manufacturing. Most alarming of all, their rate of territorial expansion had actually increased as they explored regions of space that the Council had declared off-limits. The Vorthic representative communicated through waves of mental energy that rippled through the chamber, conveying emotions and concepts that spoken language could not capture. The message was one of deep unease. Human consciousness had changed during the 3 years of systematic pressure, becoming more unified and focused than any species the Vorthok had ever encountered. Individual human minds were connecting across vast distances, sharing information, and coordinating responses in ways that suggested the emergence of a collective intelligence. But it was the Krell military commander who delivered the most disturbing news. General Thekmoran had fought in dozens of campaigns across the galaxy, bringing order to chaotic systems and peace to warring species through the application of overwhelming force. His methods had never failed to achieve the desired psychological impact on potential enemies. Until now. H.A.K. Morin recounted the encounter between his fleet and the human exploration vessel commanded by Colonel Lewis. His detailed analysis revealed something that challenged the fundamental assumptions of Krell military doctrine. The humans had not been afraid of his ships. They had shown no recognition that they were outgunned, outnumbered, and facing certain destruction if they continued their defiant behavior. Instead, they had treated his battle fleet as a scientific curiosity and had departed when their research was complete. The Krell general presented combat footage from the encounter, showing how Lewis had maneuvered her ship through his formation while conducting detailed scans of every vessel. The audacity of her actions was breathtaking, but more disturbing was her complete emotional detachment from the danger she faced. She had responded to his threats as if they were irrelevant background noise, focusing entirely on gathering intelligence. That would help humanity prepare for future encounters, Admiral Sullivan had intercepted communications traffic indicating massive fleet movements throughout Council space. Her intelligence analysts reported that every member species was contributing ships to what appeared to be the largest military operation in galactic history. The target was clearly human space, and the objective seemed to be a complete blockade. That would isolate humanity from the rest of galactic civilization until they accepted Council authority, Sullivan presented her findings to President Hayes and the Emergency Council that now governed Earth's response to the galactic crisis. The assembled leaders represented every major human world and colony, united for the first time in their species' history by the recognition that they faced an existential threat. But instead of fear or despair, the dominant emotion in the room was determination. Humanity had been tested before and had always found ways to overcome impossible odds. Danny Price received authorization to accelerate his quantum drive research beyond all safety protocols. His team worked in shifts around the clock, pushing the boundaries of human understanding in ways that would have been impossible without the pressure of imminent crisis. The breakthrough came when they realized that the quantum tunneling effect could be scaled up dramatically, allowing ships to travel distances that alien technology considered impossible. The first test of the new drive system took place in the outer solar system, where failure would not endanger Earth population. Price watched from the control center as the prototype vessel disappeared into a quantum tunnel and emerged instantaneously near Jupiter's orbit. The implications were staggering. Human ships could now travel faster and farther than any known alien technology, using principles that Council scientists did not understand and could not easily counter. Commander Blake received word that the blockade was beginning to form around human space. Alien fleets were taking positions at every major hyperspace junction, creating a barrier that would prevent any human vessel from leaving their designated territory. But Blake's response surprised even his own people. Instead of preparing for siege conditions, he began organizing the largest cooperative effort in human history. The refugee station that Blake's colonists had built became the prototype for a new kind of human community. Self-sufficient, adaptable, and capable of thriving under the harshest conditions, these settlements began appearing throughout human space as communities, prepared for total isolation from galactic civilization. But rather than cowering behind defensive barriers, they were preparing for expansion beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Dr. Martinez made the discovery that would change everything. Her analysis of Council behavior patterns revealed that their entire system was built on rigid protocols that assumed rational submission when faced with overwhelming force. They had never encountered a species that refused to acknowledge the concept of permanent defeat. Their psychological framework simply had no provisions for dealing with subjects who treated every setback as temporary and every obstacle as a problem waiting to be solved. The revelation transformed humanity's understanding of their situation. They were not fighting against superior opponents who had mastered the art of war and diplomacy. They were confronting a galactic civilization that had become so accustomed to easy victories that they had forgotten how to handle real resistance. The Council's greatest strength was their ability to make other species believe that resistance was futile. But that strength became a fatal weakness when applied to humans who simply did not accept the concept of futility. President Hayes prepared for the most important speech in human history. The message would be broadcast not just to Earth and its colonies, but to every monitoring station and communication relay in Council space. It would be humanity's formal response to 3 years of systematic suppression and the declaration of their intentions for the future. Hayes knew that his words would either establish humanity as an independent force in galactic affairs or mark the beginning of the first war their species had ever fought among the stars. The council representatives waited in their chamber, expecting to receive a message of surrender or negotiation from the human leadership. Their models predicted that the threat of total isolation would finally break human resistance and bring them to the bargaining table. They had prepared generous terms for humanity's submission, offering them a respected place in the galactic order in exchange for accepting certain limitations on their expansion and development, but Vex-9 had begun to suspect that their models might be wrong again. The xenopsychologist had been studying human cultural transmissions, trying to understand the psychological foundations that made their behavior so unpredictable. What Vex-9 discovered in human entertainment, literature, and historical records was a pattern that should have been obvious from the beginning. Humans had a saying that captured the essence of their character: the only easy day was yesterday. The galaxy was about to learn what that phrase meant when applied to a species that had learned to thrive under pressure, grow stronger through adversity, and find opportunity in every crisis. The Council's plan had failed not because they had underestimated human capabilities, but because they had fundamentally misunderstood human nature. They thought they were applying pressure to break human resistance, but they had actually been providing the exact conditions under which humanity performed best. The blockade was forming, the fleets were moving into position, and the greatest test of human determination in their species' history was about to begin. But President Hayes stood ready to deliver a message that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come, a declaration that would establish once and for all that some things could not be changed through pressure, threats, or superior force. Some things were simply fundamental to the nature of what they were. The blockade began at dawn on what Earth's historians would later call Liberation Day. 3,000 alien warships took positions around human space, creating an impenetrable barrier that cut off all trade, communication, and travel between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. The Galactic Council had deployed the largest fleet in their history, confident that this ultimate demonstration of their power would finally break human resistance and bring about the surrender they had been working toward for 3 years. Admiral Sullivan stood in the command center deep beneath Earth's surface, watching tactical displays that showed the position of every alien vessel surrounding human territory. The sight should have been terrifying, but instead she felt a strange sense of anticipation. For 3 years, humanity had been preparing for this moment, developing technologies and strategies specifically designed for the day when they would have to stand alone against the galaxy. Now that day had arrived. The Council's message came exactly 6 hours after the blockade was complete. Vex-9 delivered the ultimatum personally, speaking directly to President Hayes through a communication channel that bypassed all human defenses. The terms were simple and non-negotiable. Humanity had 72 hours to accept Council authority, agree to limitations on their expansion and technological development, and submit to a period of supervised integration into galactic civilization. Failure to comply would result in permanent isolation until they came to their senses. Hayes listened to the aliens' carefully worded demands with the patience of a man who had been expecting this conversation for months. When Vex-9 finished speaking, the President's response was brief and delivered with quiet confidence. Humanity declined the Council's generous offer and looked forward to demonstrating their appreciation for the advanced education in independence that the Council had provided over the past 3 years. Danny Price received the activation codes for Operation Breakthrough exactly 12 hours after the ultimatum expired. His quantum drive technology had been installed in secret on ships throughout human space, waiting for the moment when they would prove that the concept of containment was merely another problem waiting to be solved. The first test would come from the most heavily defended area of human space, where the alien blockade was thickest and most confident. The Pioneer emerged from quantum space directly in the center of the Krell battle formation that guarded the primary hyperspace junction near Earth. Colonel Lewis had volunteered for the mission that would either prove human technology could overcome any obstacle or result in her ship's destruction before it could complete its objectives. She appeared surrounded by 50 Krell warships, Their weapons already trained on the space where her ship materialized, but this time Lewis was not alone. Within seconds of her arrival, human ships began emerging from quantum tunnels throughout the Krell formation. Admiral Sullivan had chosen her crews carefully, selecting volunteers who understood that their mission was not to fight the aliens but to demonstrate that fighting was unnecessary when you could simply go around any obstacle they presented. The Krell commander Vraktorn found himself facing the same human officer who had calmly ignored his threats months earlier, but now she commanded a fleet instead of a single ship. Lewis opened communications with the same polite formality she had used during their first encounter, thanking the Krell for providing such excellent target practice for humanity's new transportation technology. The demonstration lasted exactly 1 hour. Human ships appeared and disappeared throughout the blockade formation, moving through quantum space as easily as swimming through water. They conducted detailed scans of every alien vessel, broadcast their findings to receivers throughout human space, and departed through tunnels that opened faster than alien weapons could track. By the time the hour was complete, humanity had proven that their blockade was as effective as a screen door on a submarine, but the real shock came when Lewis delivered her final message to the assembled alien fleets, speaking on frequencies that every ship in the blockade would receive. She announced that humanity was formally declining membership in the Galactic Council's managed civilization. Since the Council had made it clear that they could not coexist as equals, humans would build their own galactic community based on principles of voluntary cooperation rather than managed submission. The psychological impact on the blockade forces was immediate and devastating. Their entire mission had been based on the assumption that containment would lead to surrender, but humans had turned their attempted prison into a launching point for expansion beyond Council space. Worse, they had developed technologies that made the concept of containment meaningless. There was no barrier that could hold a species that could step through the barriers, as if they did not exist. Commander Blake received authorization to begin the largest colonization effort in human history. The refugee station that his people had built was transformed overnight into the command center for Operation New Horizons, a massive expansion program that would establish human settlements in regions of space the Council had never explored. Instead of accepting the limitations imposed by alien authority, humanity would simply go where that authority could not reach them. The first colony ships departed within days of the blockade's failure, carrying volunteers who understood they were pioneering not just new worlds but an entirely new model of galactic civilization. These were not refugees fleeing oppression but pioneers embracing the opportunity to build something better than what they were leaving behind. Each ship carried quantum drives that made them independent of alien transportation networks and manufacturing capabilities that would make them independent of alien technology. Dr. Martinez accompanied the first diplomatic mission to what had once been Council space, but was rapidly becoming something entirely different. Her analysis of alien psychological patterns had revealed the depth of the crisis that humanity's independence had created throughout galactic civilization. Species that had accepted Council authority for millennia were beginning to question whether submission had been necessary or simply convenient. The first defections came from the Zentari research colonies, where scientists had grown frustrated with the rigid limitations placed on their work by Council oversight. They requested permission to emigrate to human space, citing their desire to participate in the kind of unrestricted scientific investigation that humans practiced. When the Council denied these requests, entire research stations declared independence and departed for human territory using captured quantum drive technology. The exodus accelerated as word spread throughout the galaxy that alternatives to Council authority existed. Individual ships, then entire fleets, then whole planetary populations began seeking refuge in the expanding sphere of human influence. They came not as conquered subjects but as voluntary allies who shared humanity's rejection of artificial limitations on their potential. The Galactic Council convened emergency sessions as their carefully maintained order began collapsing around them. The Vorthak reported that their telepathic monitoring networks were detecting unprecedented levels of dissent and rebellion throughout Council space. The Krell found their military forces stretched thin, as they tried to prevent defections while maintaining the failed blockade around human territory. The Zentari discovered that their logical arguments for accepting authority were being questioned by populations who had learned that resistance was possible. Vex 9 presented the Council with an analysis that confirmed their worst fears. The Human Independence Initiative had not just freed one species from Council control, but had demonstrated to the entire galaxy that such control was optional. The psychological foundations of their civilization were crumbling as billions of beings realized that they had accepted limitations not because those limitations were necessary, but because they had been told they were inevitable. Admiral Sullivan established the first human alliance defense fleet using volunteer crews from dozens of different species. Former Council subjects who had never imagined themselves as warriors found themselves learning to operate human weapons and tactics alongside the species that had shown them freedom was possible. The fleet's mission was not conquest but protection, ensuring that those who chose independence would be able to maintain it. Colonel Lewis received command of the exploration vessel New Galaxy, equipped with the most advanced quantum drive system ever built and crewed by representatives of every species that had joined the human alliance. Her mission was to venture beyond the galactic rim, seeking new frontiers and new civilizations that had never been touched by Council authority. She would carry humanity's message to the universe beyond, that growth, exploration, and achievement were not privileges to be granted by authority, but rights to be claimed by anyone willing to work for them. The Council faced a choice that their protocols had never prepared them for. They could attempt to fight a war against an enemy that could appear anywhere in the galaxy without warning, or they could try to negotiate with a species that had already rejected everything they had to offer. But there was a third option that some Council members were beginning to consider, an option that would require them to abandon the foundations of their entire civilization. The new galaxy began to take shape 6 months after the failed blockade, but it looked nothing like the ordered hierarchy that the Council had maintained for millennia. Instead of rigid boundaries and controlled expansion, space buzzed with activity. As dozens of species explored freely for the first time in their recorded history, human quantum drive technology had been shared openly with anyone who requested it. Creating a transportation network based on cooperation rather than control, Commander Blake stood on the observation deck of New Horizons Station, watching colony ships depart for worlds that the Council had declared uninhabitable or forbidden. Each vessel carried mixed crews of humans and former Council subjects, working together to establish settlements that would answer to no authority except their own conscience and practical needs. The refugee station that had once housed 15,000 displaced colonists had become the administrative center for over 200 independent worlds. The transformation had not been easy or peaceful. The Galactic Council had attempted to maintain their authority through military force, sending fleets to reclaim defecting populations and prevent the spread of what they called the human infection. But their warships found themselves fighting an enemy that could appear anywhere without warning and disappear before effective retaliation was possible. More damaging to their cause was the fact that their own crews were beginning to desert in significant numbers. Dr. Martinez received a communication that she had been expecting for months but had hoped would never come. The X9 requested a private meeting to discuss terms for ending the crisis that was tearing galactic civilization apart. The xenopsychologist who had originally recommended the suppression protocol now faced the task of finding a way to coexist with the species that had proven all their assumptions wrong. The meeting took place on a neutral space station constructed jointly by human and former Council engineers. Martinez arrived with a small diplomatic team, while Vex-9 came with representatives from each remaining Council species. The alien delegation looked exhausted and confused, like beings who had discovered that the fundamental principles governing their universe were no longer reliable. 9 began with an admission that cost the xenopsychologist considerable personal pride. The Council's assessment of humanity had been completely wrong from the beginning. They had treated human determination as a character flaw that could be corrected through proper pressure and guidance, never realizing that it was actually their defining strength. The suppression protocol had not only failed but had created the exact conditions under which humans performed at their absolute best. Martinez listened to the alien's carefully prepared apology with the patience of someone who had spent years studying the psychology behind Council behavior. When X9 finished speaking, she responded with a question that captured the essential difference between human and Council thinking. Why should humanity accept limitations on their growth and exploration when the universe was vast enough for everyone to expand freely without conflict? The question revealed the fundamental flaw in Council psychology that had made their civilization possible but also made it vulnerable to species like humanity. They thought in terms of limited resources, controlled access, and managed competition because they had never imagined that abundance was possible if intelligent beings simply refused to accept artificial scarcity. Their entire system of governance was built on the premise that someone had to be in charge of rationing opportunities. Admiral Sullivan established the first Human Alliance Council using principles that would have seemed chaotic to the old galactic order. Instead of permanent representatives with authority over their subjects, the Alliance operated through voluntary cooperation and mutual assistance agreements. Species joined not by submitting to human authority, but by agreeing to share resources, knowledge, and opportunities freely with all Alliance members. The Alliance grew rapidly as entire sectors of the former Council space declared independence and requested membership. The Zentari research colonies brought advanced scientific knowledge and logical problem-solving methods. The Vorthek telepathic networks provided communication capabilities that spanned the galaxy instantly. Even some Krell military units defected, seeking the opportunity to test themselves against challenges that required innovation rather than simple, overwhelming force. Colonel Lewis launched the first expedition beyond the galactic rim with a fleet of exploration vessels crewed by volunteers from 30 different species. Their mission was to make contact with civilizations that had never been influenced by Council authority and to establish trade and diplomatic relations based on mutual respect rather than hierarchical submission. The universe beyond their galaxy was vast and full of opportunities for species willing to work together as equals. Danny Price opened the first Alliance Technical Institute on a world that the Council had declared too dangerous for colonization. The facility became a center for collaborative research where beings from different species worked together to solve problems that no single race could handle alone. The breakthroughs came faster than anyone had anticipated as diverse perspectives combined to create solutions that none of them could have achieved individually. President Hayes addressed the first Alliance Assembly with representatives from over 100 worlds and species in attendance. His speech was broadcast throughout the galaxy, reaching populations that were still deciding whether to maintain their loyalty to the old order or embrace the opportunities offered by the Alliance. The message was simple but revolutionary. The only authority that mattered was what intelligent beings chose to accept voluntarily. The Galactic Council attempted one final effort to maintain their relevance by offering humanity full membership with unprecedented privileges. They proposed making humans the senior partner in a reformed galactic government that would incorporate Alliance principles while maintaining Council oversight. The offer was generous by historical standards and represented a complete reversal of their original assessment of humanity's proper place in the galaxy. Dr. Martinez delivered humanity's response to the Council's proposal during a meeting that was attended by representatives from across the galaxy. Her answer was polite but firm, reflecting the consensus that had emerged from months of discussion among Alliance members. They appreciated the Council's offer but had no interest in ruling over other species or accepting the responsibility for managing galactic civilization. The Alliance operated on the principle that intelligent beings were capable of managing their own affairs without external oversight. They would cooperate with anyone who wished to work together as equals. but they had no desire to establish themselves as the new galactic authority. The universe was big enough for multiple approaches to civilization, and diversity of thought and governance would make everyone stronger. The old Galactic Council gradually faded into irrelevance, as their member species either joined the Alliance or established independent governments based on Alliance principles. Some Council loyalists retreated to isolated systems where they maintained their hierarchical traditions, and the Alliance respected their choice to live as they preferred. Freedom meant the right to choose your own path, even if that path led away from freedom. Admiral Sullivan stood on the bridge of the flagship Liberty, watching construction crews from a dozen different species working together to build humanity's first deep space exploration vessel designed entirely with Alliance technologies. The ship would carry mixed crews to regions of the universe that no one had ever explored, seeking new frontiers and new civilizations to welcome into their growing community of free peoples. The final entry in Earth's historical records of the crisis captured the essential truth that emerged from humanity's confrontation with galactic authority. The Council's plan had failed not because humans were stronger or smarter than other species, but because they had never learned to accept that failure was permanent. When faced with impossible odds, overwhelming force, or systematic oppression, they simply refused to quit looking for alternatives. That refusal had proven contagious, spreading throughout the galaxy as other species learned that limitations were often self-imposed and that authority was only as strong as the consent of those who accepted it. The galaxy would never return to the ordered hierarchy that the Council had maintained, but it had become something better, a vast community of free beings, working together to explore the infinite possibilities that the universe offered to those who refused to accept that anything was truly impossible. The stars had never seemed so welcoming as they did to the crews preparing for humanity's next great adventure. Behind them lay a galaxy transformed by the simple recognition that some things could not be changed through pressure or force because they were fundamental to the nature of what they were. Ahead lay an infinite universe full of opportunities for species that had learned the most important lesson humanity had to teach, that quitting was always optional, and the only real failure was deciding not to try.